Hi everyone, and welcome to the GSC Virtual Conference 2024. My name is Chris Knowles, and I'm the Sysprog at Vitali and co-chair of the 102 working stream. So this session is all about the new modern face of the mainframe, Zowe, as being presented by IBM's Joe Winchester. So Joe loves hearing your questions, so please post any you might have in the chat, and I can cascade these when appropriate during or at the end of the session. Another thing to keep in mind as well is feedback is also well received and allows us organisers and the presenters to further improve the experience for you all at future conferences. So I'll also pop a link in the chat, which I invite you to check out at the end. So I don't think I've missed anything else. So without further ado, I will now hand over to Joe, and I will mute myself.
Cool. Thanks, Chris. Thanks very much.
No
You can
worries.
hear me okay, and you can see my screen, yeah?
Yeah, I can.
Excellent. Okay. Sorry, I didn't want to be. Yeah, so thanks, everybody. Thanks so much for joining. I know there's lots going on. I think the GSE Virtual Conference has 10 different tracks going on simultaneously. So if you get bored of this one, there's other ones you can pop in and out of. And I think, Chris, we got an hour. Is that right? Or is it 45 minutes or?
We've got a whole hour.
Got a whole hour. Woohoo!
Yeah.
So buckle up. So what I found out about 5 minutes before was that the deck I was going to use PowerPoint seems to have mysteriously just forgotten all of the work I did on that deck. So I've thrown something together literally in about 4 minutes. But what I'll probably be doing throughout the hour is dipping in and out of demos. I'm very much a sort of demo, sort of hands-on type person. And if you have any questions, I think everybody's muted, but I think throw them in the chat. And Chris, if that's all right, if you just interrupt me and call out whenever, if you see something you don't like that I'm doing, or you think I'm trying to pull the wool over your eyes, or you want me to go down a different track, make sure you ask me that question while we're here. Cool. And if not, you can always reach out to me afterwards. You can hunt me down 1,000,001 different ways. But if you hit me on LinkedIn, that's probably the first way to hunt me down. Cool. So the first thing I want to talk about is the fact that even though I work for IBM and I thank IBM every month when I get a paycheck in my bank account, is that my kind of sort of spiritual employer for the Zowe project is a Linux Foundation. And I was actually very lucky last week. I was actually in Seattle for a Linux Foundation conference, and got to talk to Linus Torvalds for the first time. Met him, very nice, modest, incredibly intelligent man. And Linus Torvald is the creator of the Linux open source operating system. That's available in lots of different distros and things. So what the Linux Foundation is really a body of an umbrella organization for lots of different projects where people want to get enterprise computing using open source, which is sort of a dichotomy, because when people think of open source, often they think of all of the vulnerabilities that open source has, the attack vectors on supply chains. SolarWinds was a very high profile one just a couple of weeks ago. There was one called XE, which is a very sophisticated attack to sort of take over a very key component of encryption in the SSH protocol, or secure SSH protocol, which would have been a disaster had it gone live, but it was caught beforehand. And one of the things, so even though open source carries risks with it, so does everything, so does crossing the road, so does running proprietary software. The Linux Foundation has about 270 projects under its remit. And I often sometimes I go and visit customers and they say, oh, we don't trust open source. And then they say, well, often that's the mainframers. And I'll say, well, do you have, what do your non-mainframe group use, sometimes called the distributed organization, use for their DevOps? And they go, oh, they're using Jenkins. And be like, okay, well, Jenkins is open source and also a Linux Foundation project. What do you have any public cloud provider? And they go, oh yeah, sure, we're building all of these containers and running them with Helm charts and Kubernetes on a public cloud. And I'm like, well, both of those technologies are LF. And by the way, what car do you drive? And they might tell me to make a car, and I say, well, actually, I happen to know that every time you press your brake pedal, the reason that your brakes engage and your brake lights go on, and that's logged, is because of real-time Linux runs inside your car. So and Node.js, which powers about 50% of all websites, server-side JavaScript. So what I'm trying to paint for you here is the fact that the Linux Foundation is the umbrella organization behind Zowe. And we're constantly challenged around things like making sure that we keep up to date with security patches and vulnerabilities and source code scanning, and not having too much power in too many individuals' hands, and all the bad things that people might think would happen if an open source community just kind of ran free and went a little bit rogue. Cool. And your first port of call to find anything out about Linux, about Zowe, well, Linux, even linuxfoundation.org, is zoe.org. Websites with .org at the end are friendly websites, like your local library or your local sort of, scout group or something like that, or sort of pet charity might have a .org at the end, because they're a not-for-profit organization. So Linux Foundation is a not-for-profit organization, zoe.org. Cool. So at the genesis of the Zowe project, a number of software companies got together, IBM, Rocket Software, and Broadcom, who were then, before they'd been acquired by Broadcom, who were CA Computer Associates, all, big animals on the field of mainframe software. And they were literally had their heads thrown together by a particular customer at the time, where all three of those companies had independently presented their modernization strategy around tooling to that particular very large customer. I think one of the IBM Z platforms, probably top 10 biggest customers, very large US-based bank. And they basically, that executive from that customer basically turned around to all three of those individual companies and said, you're all doing this separately. You're all trying to climb the same hill and solve the same challenge, which is about mainframe, making the mainframe ecosystem be more open and familiar for people who didn't grow up with it. So the mainframe's celebrating its 60-year anniversary this year. I think I saw on LinkedIn, it was April the 7th, 60 years ago, that the System 360 was first launched, which is the kind of sort of genesis of mainframe computing, or at least the only surviving genesis of mainframe computing. And some people are fortunate enough to have grown up with the platform throughout a huge amount of those 60 years. Personally, my background is that I actually only came to mainframe computing in my 40s. So I grew up around Windows and Linux and sort of gaming software and very, very sort of rich graphical software, flight simulators, things like that. And remember, one of the first things that I found when I first came to mainframe was that it wasn't a familiar environment to me. So I've been very blessed that I've worked on the Zowe project since day one. And one of the challenges that all of the three companies were trying to do before they then partnered with Linux Foundation, there's now 9 companies involved with building Zowe in the mainframe space, was create something that non-mainframers could find it intuitive to use to operate mainframe technology, but also to pay respect and homage and recognize the importance of the sort of incumbent legends that have grown up with the platform. And possibly one of the reasons that the mainframe is still doing so well is because they've resisted lots of other sort of fads and fireworks that have all burnt out, that have come along in that 60 years as well. So the natural reticence within the mainframe community saying we're part of, we're what keeps the world going. We watch all this stuff zooming by us in the fast lane and just ignore it because we know it's just going to run out of gas further down the road. But then at the same time, we have to respect and recognize that, but at the same time, realize that the platform, has some, has some dated and rough edges around the corner. And one of the companies that I first worked with, I remember talking to their vice president of, well, I suppose their vice president of IT operations modernization. And the word that stuck in my mind was mingle. And he said to me that the mainframe IT staff he had would eat lunch separately in the cafeteria. They would use a completely different set of tools to the non-mainframe staff. They would even raise tickets. They had a ticketing system so that one of them had to raise a ticket to get the other one to do any work, even though they were all co-located in the same building. There was a lack of trust between them. Arguments about whose fault it was when an application that was running in multiple tiers of the bank got into problems, and that his North Star was to basically make it so that all of those barriers dissolved away. So people used a common tool set, spoke a common language. And the success of that particular bank, I went back to see them recently, was that they had actually had that. They actually had a bit more mingling. And some of their mainframe IT staff actually got involved in non-mainframe projects and vice versa. and they're very, very happy with that. So very, very quickly, what I'm going to do now is I'm just going to drop the demo because I enjoy doing demos. And Chris, if anybody asks me or does a stump the chump, just let me know. So this is what I first grew up with when I first learned to do my first mainframe class. I grew up with ISPF. What I'm going to do now is a little demo, and I'm just going to show how to look at some files, and I'm going to look at a particular piece of JCL. I'm going to submit a job and just kind of fiddle around with that using 3 different technologies. I'm going to use the incumbent 3270 emulator. I'm going to use Zowe's command line interface, and I'm going to be using Zowe's Visual Studio Code plugin. So just sort of compare and contrast the 3 and talk to all 3 of them. So again, without trashing ISPF, it's still very, very powerful. The first thing I was told to do in class was to do sort of 3.4 and then edit some things with a dataset qualifier of winch J, and I hit enter. I remember being puzzled by what all of these things are. I never know quite what they all are. You know, I just sort of trust it. I hit enter. I have to make sure, oh, I hit enter in the wrong space. You know, so I didn't even set that one up. I have to hit enter when my tab is in here, you know, if it's on the wrong part. It's not the most intuitive of things to use. I'm comfortable driving it now, but it still wasn't. And if I'm looking at things within, if I have to page down, you know, I have to remember to hit function key 8 and function key 7. And anyway, I want to go into here, and I hit that to do B for browse, and I'm just going to delete some data sets actually. And again, great. And I've got some JCL up. Okay. Now within Zowe, one of the 2 key parts I'm going to introduce is the command line interface and Visual Studio Code. So this particular piece of JCL, and it's just going to copy a file. And what I actually know what to do next is edit this, and I'll show you how to manipulate this within Zowe. Actually, maybe I'll do it quite now. So maybe I'll do it first of all within this. I should put my money where my mouth is. So if I do copy job, I think I can do E for edit. There's a file called from, and I'm going to copy it, and I'm going to call it GSE 2024, and I have to hit save. I think I have to hit save. See, let's go and look at that file that's with the word from in it. So let me go and enter from. And I was just now doing another webinar. Hello, folks, today at GSE UK 2024. Now I have to delete things to the end. I'm sure lots of people who know ISPF better than me are yelling at the screen, telling me that there's an easier way to do this. So now I've edited the file, haven't I? Oh, goodness. And now I have to hit Control-7 to get the one back from the top of the page. And then I do E within this, and I do sub to submit it, don't I? But now to look at that job, which was called ABCD1234, job 03065. Now I have to exit this, and now I have to go back. And apologies, because I am not the best user of this. I have to do ST, I have to do pre of that. And then I have to remember which job number it was I just submitted. It will be the highest one because I've been doing this before. So it was the last one, and I can see it. And if I tab it down, anyway, I can learn this the same way that a cello player can take something that's built by a master crafts person, that's basically a piece of wood with horsehair, and make it sing, make beautiful noise. It's much easier. My personal background is I'm a piano player. I like playing the piano, and I was training classical piano, but I can play other piano genres and other musical instruments because on my keyboard at home, I can hit a switch and say, make yourself sound like a cello. And I can read music, and I can press the buttons or the keys. And it sounds like a pretty good cello. It's not as good as a cello player, I admit, but I didn't have to learn how to make that wooden box sing. So let's go and have a look at 2 things I'm going to show you. First of all, I'm going to show you Visual Studio Code. Now, within Visual Studio Code, let me shut all of this down a little bit. This is the Visual Studio Code. Within Visual Studio Code, it's an open source. It's a free environment that lets you just edit files and do anything from simple file editing towards growing it into a very powerful sort of integrated development environment. Within Visual Studio Code, there's what's called a marketplace, and you can click the marketplace and you can search for extensions. So I have extensions loaded to do with everything from spell checking, so I'm constantly making mistakes, You can have AI extensions to give you suggestions for what you're going to write next. You've got lots of different language extensions. There's a huge marketplace of extensions available. And if you type the word Zowe, you'll see that the Zowe community has 3 different extensions. And the one I'm going to focus on today is the most successful extension the Zowe community has built, which is called the Zowe Explorer. So if this was you were new, you would just have it, that button would say install, and you would install it. Having installed it, what you now have is you now have 3 different views available to you. By default, you won't have any systems defined. You still have to define the connection to those systems. I won't show that now, but people can ask me questions for that. But what I've instantly got is I've got the same system that I had available here. Let me go back here. I'm connected to that same system here. And let's go and have a quick look. We go back to 3.4 again. winchj.star. So winchj, I go to the system I've got here. I can right mouse click it, and I'll just go winchj.star, and I'll basically see that same information lined up side by side. But rather than me having to use function key 8 and function key 7 and enter things, now if I go and look at my winchj.jcl, which was my job control language one I've got open, I'm just going to delete a few of these. Sorry. Sorry about that. My keyboard is going. Okay, so let's go and look at the from member that I just had there. Here we are. Hello, folks at GSE UK today. Again, I'm saving it directly, so it's going directly against my mainframe PDS member. I'm going to copy job. I'm going to call it Bob123. I've got content assist available, so I can, see different things I've got. I can create shortcuts for bits of JCL if I want to. I'm now going to right mouse click. I'm going to submit it. And now when I right mouse, it's intuitive. I don't have to use the slash key and remember which option it is. And when I hit submit, I have a little pop up over here, little pop down, I suppose it would be. And I can see the job that finished in the output state. And for folks who, the JCIB Gen is basically just a copy. So it's copied that one, and I can just do a quick twisty. So what I've got instantly is something that's a little bit more intuitive. You can hunt and peck away your way around how to use it. And we don't have to switch between looking at the files and looking at the jobs. Within the Zowe Explorer, I've got 2 avenues I could do now. I could spend a lot more time showing you the same scenario through the Zowe command line interface, or I could delve a little bit more into Visual Studio Code. I think what I'll do while I'm in Visual Studio Code is I'll talk a little bit more about Visual Studio Code, because there's some quite neat things running in this. I've got the Kix one loaded here, by the way. I might just unload that really quickly just because it's just going to get in the way. Okay, so I've just unloaded that, and Kix isn't shown there anymore. I can load that if anybody wants. So this is a list of all data sets. I can change what I'm filtering. If I particularly like this data set, so winchj.jcl, I might be like, you know what, I really like this data set. So I'm going to right mouse click it, and I'm going to say add to favorite. So what I do right now is I have my favorites, and I've got winchj.jcl as my favorite. I might also do a quick filter and say, let's go and look at all of my user.proclib. User.proclib for system programmers is quite a powerful data set. I might say, I like this one as well, and say add to favorites. And what you've now got is when I shut this down and re-enter it again, all of my favorites are remembered. So it's a bit like browser tabs, which is quite a nice feature. So if you're working in data sets with one high-level qualifier, perhaps your own user ID, and perhaps you're working on a project where there's another one and 3 or 4, you can collect all these together, even if they don't have the same lineage hierarchy. So you might have bits of JCL, bits of Rex, some very, you can create your own kind of like list, your own palette that you want, which is actually quite useful. And you can just recall it and just work with those directly. And that's quite a powerful feature, the favorites that are there. If I go back as well, one of the things, I think the last one I did was user.proclib. User.proclib tends to be quite big. I've got lots of things with Z, because I'm a Zowe developer. But if you were dealing with Palm libraries, often we get a lot of system programmers at mainframe conferences. So I've got one here where I'll go user.proclib, r star or something like that. you can enter wildcard characters in again. So you can have a filter that's got things within it. And what you do, if I go and visit customers who are already using this, they create, like I said, their own palette, their own set of favorites that let them do things. Now, if I just go back to winchj.star, another thing that I always struggled with as a new to Z person was creating a data set or creating my first file. I remember there was a post, I think it was on a LinkedIn forum recently, where somebody said it took them half a day to create their first file. Because when you create a file on the mainframe, it wants to know how many tracks and cylinders, and you almost feel like you're going down a history lesson. There's a lot of value into why things are held that way, but sometimes you have a whole history lesson that you have to learn about, the width of punch cards and certain tape drives and number of blocks within a cylinder that perhaps gets in the way of what you want to do, which is just, put some source code somewhere. So within this, we have the ability. So winchj.jcl, if I right mouse click it, I can see all of my attributes if I particularly want to. This is a fixed block 80, but I can right mouse click and I can say allocate like. So I can just say I want a new one with the same attributes. So I can just say winchj.gse, GSE, sorry, GSE.jcl. Okay, and I can just effectively do a copy and allocate like, which is a very, very common scenario that you see occurring. And it's just doing a little bit of thinking now, and it's created one, and I can say new member, create new member. Upload member is quite cute as well. So often, a lot of times, you might find that somebody's just given you a file, and that file is held locally on your laptop. And what you want to do, in fact, I might even do that within the demo. So I'm just going to quickly reset my laptop quickly. So within my MICTA GSE 2024, let me create a simple file. Okay, so if I go touch abc.data or abc.txt, I've got a file. It's an empty file. Let me just edit that file quickly with, I don't know, vi. I can, put something in here, please, Joe. For some reason, I like VI. It's just, so let me cat that file. So this is the file on my laptop. And if I go down here, I can just so let's just do an upload member, and I should be able to point to that file. So what Joe GSE 2024, where was it? Oh, it must be this one here. Anyway, it's this file here. So I just upload the file, and that bad boy should just transfer across. And that's pretty cute because often now using the command line, so it did do a code page transfer there between what was UTF-8 on my MacBook towards the Obsidic code page. If it was going into the USS directory, it would have tagged it correctly. And there are ways that I can override what I want the code page to be. If I want to, I can set my default code page. I know one particular customer I worked with, they were working in, anyway, they were working in Sweden. They had a non-standard code page. Swedish alphabet has 29 characters to it. So we had to fool around with the profile to basically make sure that the code page wasn't IBM 1047, which is the default. Okay. We can filter PDS members, we can sort them, migrate, recall, upload, a lot of things you would expect to be able to do. So I think that's probably what I'll show you about data sets. We looked at jobs just a little bit now. So let me just scoot around and go to jobs a little bit quickly. Jobs is quite cute. So if I go and look at 3270 STSF does have some quite nice features. I want to get back in. Sorry, what have I gone and done? Look at this. I make mistakes. STSF has a feature called ST, which is quite good. So I can do like pre-asterisk, owner asterisk. I can see a bunch of jobs here. They're all active. The white ones are active, and the sort of blue ones are in a kind of non-active state. Within here, I'm just going to do a quick filter. You can create different filters, and you execute the filters within here. I've got a filter already for owner asterisk prefix star status active. Let me change the status to be star, which is status all. It's going to be a big query, so it will run it. Let's see what it does. Oh no, submit this query. I had to actually submit it. So this is all of my jobs running. And I can see again, it's got CC0. I've got some return codes. One of the things, sorry, I've just got some pop-ups coming over here. I'll just delete those. One of the things I'd like to sort of show you that's quite a nice feature, if I could just go and look at a particular job, I think the Zowe SMF job is called IZUSVR. If a lot of the time, now this job is not a traditional piece of mainframe work. It's Zowe SMF server, so it's running in Java. So Java is a sort of UTF language, a Linux language that's sort of ported to ZOS. It runs under USS, sorry. If I do an S for that, if I wanted to search that job for something, like I'm looking for the word HTTP, I can type HTTP and I can hit function key and it occurs lots of places. I think I can use function key 5 to sort of go down all of these. I think I can use a function key 12 to scroll to the right, or maybe it's 11. Anyway, it's quite awkward to use it. What I like quite a bit about using this, let's see if I can find it in this big list. If not, I could always have redone the search. I think it's quite high up, IZUSVR. If I go and look at this, it just appears nicely for me. I can scroll to the right. I'm just using my mouse key. And I can do Control F, and I can do HTTP, and I can see all occurrences of it. I can even hyperlink over that if I wanted to open that. There's a hyperlink. And that's quite nice. If you're opening a spool file with lots of information within it, and you want to search for all occurrences of an error message or something like that. So for example, you can see at the top, as I type the word warning, I type W and it will show me all of the occurrences here of the word W, and I can click that and it will say WARNING, and I can see them all here. And that's very useful as well. If you're doing something like if you're looking at the syslog and you want to look for a particular error message and all occurrences of it, you can basically search that. And if you're running something that's in perhaps Java and are using, it's got a very wide error message, you don't have to worry too much about the function key 12, I think it is, that moves to the right, and having that mapped correctly in your keyboard in a way that doesn't collide. You can just use scrolling to the right. And you can do other things as well on jobs. You can issue a modified command. That's quite useful if the job's able to accept modified commands. Kix regions, for example, you can do a /F and send Kix commands to. You can issue stop commands, assuming you all have the right permission for this. I think there might be a couple of chat questions. Oh, what's a transport mechanism? Great, thanks, Mark. So Mark asked the question of what's the transport mechanism for uploads. So by default right now, I'm connected to Zowe SMF server, REST API server. And on Zowe SMF's REST API server, it's using a put request. So that will be using, and that put request will be secured by a certificate. So that's using TLS, so that's a transport layer security over HTTP, often known as HTTPS. So it's not SSH, so I don't need to have an SSH port open. It's not an SSH port. It is also possible to configure all of this software that you're looking at in front of you here to work over FTP. If you download what's called the Zowe Explorer extension for FTP, which I've got running, and I'll go and show you. So I have a connection here called ZFTP3B using FTP. It's because I'm a sort of test, I test software and I like to blog about it and things. Basically, this is the exact same functionality running across FTP, running across a file transfer protocol, which can be secured across TLS as well using, I think it's FTPS is the protocol. I always get confused. There's FTPS and there's SFTP, and I think FTPS is the one that secures FTP over a TLS connection. So it's certificate-based encryption and certificate-based trust. Next question from Hamish, is there an equivalent to ISPF edit macros in VS Code? Get asked this quite a lot, actually. So one of the things you can do in VS Code is you can build plugins to VS Code. I don't have one particularly running, but if I do Command P, and if I do the greater than sign, I will see all of the plugins that I've got available here. So everything that's able to be done within Visual Studio Code as commands are also available as tasks. So all of these are available as tasks, and I can actually invoke them to the keyboard this way as well, which is good. Obviously, there's keyboard assistant and accessibility requirements Some people are more productive with the keyboard, and some people have to lean towards the keyboard just because of the abilities that they favor using. It is possible to write your own task runners. So Visual Studio Code has task runners, and I've seen some really neat things done where people write task runners. Let's see if I can find an example of one, just to kind of shoot from the hip here. Within medium.com/Zowe, which is the Zowe blog site, which is linked to from the bottom of zowe.org if you forget your way. So very quickly, I should demonstrate what I show. I should put my money where my mouth is. If I go to zowe.org, which is our homepage, everything here in the Zowe community is linked to meetings, source code for everything, the right Slack channel. Recently, the Discord community actually just created a Zowe channel and the Z System enthusiasts, which is quite neat when you still into. But right down the bottom, you'll see all of the Zowe blogs, and you can say check out other blogs, and that probably would have taken me to medium.com/Zowe. And I think it's called, if I just enter the word task runner, if I can, so I don't have the word task runner. What was the task runner? Zowe CLI, extending Zowe Explorer with Zowe CLI. It might be this one using the Python. Let me see if it's a Zowe CLI and VS Code tasks. This is written by Dan. Dan's a phenomenal contributor to the Zowe Explorer. Very good blogger. And he's showing examples, I think, here. Yeah, here we are. So you can create integrated terminal options to VS Code tasks. So what you're doing is you're basically creating in JSON, which is JavaScript object notation, you're basically creating what I just showed you, which is the thing where you do Command P, and then you list the tasks, and you can see all of the tasks. So this is a nice one, and I think Dan's got some links to some repositories, and there's other things there. So basically, the way to do that kind of powerful customization is through creating Visual Studio task runners. Cool. Another question, if you have a member of a PDS or PDS data set and somebody edits the lines, yeah, so we're talking about locks. So within ISPF, if you put when you edit a member, it places what's called an enqueue on that member. So that is a pessimistic lock on that file that blocks anybody else from editing that file. Now, within in a REST API or a client server posture, we could have put an enqueue on that file. The APIs are available to us. The danger with that is that if you then forget or your client software falls over or something, your enqueue might remain alive. So the enqueues are not placed on files, but what happens is if a file is modified on disk by somebody else afterwards, it will detect for it and use a compare editor. And again, I should put my money where my mouth is, because let me see if I can demo that. So if I put the word from on this particular, oh, that's an FTP one. Let me do 0SMF again. Let me go back into here. So it's a very good question. So let me go and look at Bob. So if I go and look at Bob, Bob says, hello, folks at GSE 2024 again. Let me try.
Play your screen again, I think, Joe. I don't know if you're, I think it's your camera at the moment.
What happened? Did I stop sharing?
Or unless I'm on the wrong.
I might be.
I can just see your camera at the moment. I can't see.
How about others? How long have I been talking complete nonsense?
Oh no, it's good for someone else, but good for me here. So maybe I'm just lost your screen somewhere. Might be me.
No way. Sorry, Chris.
Hold
I hope
fire.
so. I'd be terrified if I was just sitting here waiting. Thank you very much for interrupting me. So,
Oh no,
so
it's me. I'm at the top. You can click on meeting or Joe's or your screen, can't you? So I've clicked on the wrong one. So my bad. Sorry,
no
guys.
worries. Okay, all right. Sorry. Thanks, Chris. Sorry about that. Okay, I'll just drag that off. I'm quite a klutz when it. So it's a great question. It's a great question. And if you're editing something that's very sensitive, like a Palm library or sort of, some information that's very operator centric, that's going to change how a subsystem comes up or an LPAR IPLs, you really don't want to have any possibility of collision and mistakes, right? So I'm just going to see if I can 3270. Great. So let's go and have a look. Let me go and put my money where my mouth is. And I have not actually demoed this live. Sorry. So if I go into 3.4 and I go into winch J dot JCL. Let me go into the member called Bob. And I go for B for browse, I think. So let me go to Bob123, and we go to Bob123 and do an E for edit. And let me go and change it. Hello, folks at GSE. Let me just put the word, I don't know, change. You see, I promise you I'm not deliberately trying to make mistakes to sort of, let me do a save on that. So if I go save on that, yeah, save. So this is now effectively, I think I've recreated whatever the question was anyway, the kind of in-flight conflict. So hello, folks. This was changed by ISPF. What happens next? Right, and I don't actually know. So let me see what happens. It's a great question. So I'm going to go try and save it. What happened? So here we go. The content of the file is newer. Compare your version with the latest. Can you see it? Or overwrite the content of the file with your changes. And let me just do a quick compare. And if I hit compare, what I can see is that what's happened. So this is the one on disk, right? I think on disk I made it to be change me, didn't I? Yeah, I made it to be change me on disk. And it's basically told me, it's detected the collision, it's told me, and it's given me the option to basically say win or splat. It's a very simple file. It's just like one line. But if it was a much bigger file, and perhaps I'd changed 20 lines, I didn't want to lose them, and somebody else had 20, this has become a more sophisticated merge browser. And I have the option to merge it. And that's little round thing shows it's what's called a dirty editor. So it's different to what's on disk. And I have the option to change it. So I think if I hit Command S again, failed to save again, now it's giving me an error. And anyway, I'm just going to do overwrite, and it did overwrite. So now if I go back to 3270 and I go back to this and I go to that, it overwrote it. So it's basically the difference between an optimistic lock and a pessimistic lock, but it won't splat the data without you having to kind of like, are you sure? Are you really sure? I'm giving you the chance to compare. Okay. So great question. Brilliant. Now I'm going to talk a little bit more about the Zowe command line interface, if that's okay. Is there any more questions that people want to know? By the way, I do a lot of development in Java at the moment, and I love the Unix System Services view. The Unix System Services view is basically, it does what it says on the tin. It lets me look at USS, and I can look at, so Zowe has a big server component I haven't talked to particularly yet, but it lets me configure things. And if I'm opening files on disk, like JSON files or YAML files or Java, that's a very nice wide file there. So I'm just scrolling it all the way to the right, and a lot of text there. I still meet customers now who use ISPF edit 3.17, or they use VI or iShell or something running in a 3270 emulator. This just lends itself quite nicely. And again, because I can just right mouse click and say upload as well, and I can upload files and things, it's really good. And if you don't have FTP there, or perhaps you have to get permission to get FTP enabled temporarily, because FTP isn't the most secure protocol, it does, and it requires strange things to happen with firewalls if you run it over TLS. This all works over basically HTTP secured by TLS certificates through the ZOSMF REST API. It's just a better way to get data back and forth generally. Okay, cool. So what I'm going to do now is I'm talking about the Zowe command line interface. So the command line is the backbone of any developer, any power developer. Doesn't matter what platform they're using. So I develop code, and within IBM and open source communities I work with, we use Git. And I just type the word Git. I don't know the syntax behind all of Git. I'm always losing myself, going to Stack Overflow, finding there's always edge conditions about like merging and strange things. But what's nice about Git is that the Git command, all of the syntax for the command is at my fingertips. within running it. If I use Docker, and if I want to test Docker, I just type Docker. If you want to type, key tool or OpenSSL or all these great commands, basically have the help text effectively built in at your fingertips. So Zowe has a command line interface. So I kind of lent on the keyboard there. I might actually make that a little bit bigger. Let me pass me way in. The older I get, the worse my eyesight gets. So within the Zowe command line interface, when you download the Zowe CLI, all of the syntax is there. So I'm going to try and do that same thing that I did beforehand, where I'm just going to look at the file and maybe submit a job. So all of the syntax for all of the commands is based into groups. Zowe is an open source project. It ships the core command line interface. It also has 22 extensions for the command line interface. So if I type Zowe files, because I want to do something with files, and I can see I've got something to do with files, and I type Zowe files, it will now tell me. It's a little bit annoying that I have to scroll up to get that. I might possibly, I'm just thinking as I talk to you about this, that the groups are the most important information. Maybe we should reorder that. But because I was going to have a look, and I can see all of the syntax I've got. So I'm going to do Zowe files list. That looks interesting. So what I'm doing here is just the more I use the command, the more it introduces to me the syntax that I now need to get. So I've got Zowe files list. I can list data sets. I can list Unix mounts, quite a lot of powerful stuff. So now I'm just going to do Zowe files list, ds. And now I'm not quite sure what to do. So now I do -h. So -h for -help. At any given point when I'm using a Zowe command, doesn't matter whether I'm right at the beginning or I'm like 9 levels down, I can always type -h and it will always show me example syntax at that point. So the idea is to try and not leave you hanging out to dry. Anyway, I mangled that expression. So here we go. So Zowe files list ds, and I'm going to do winchj dot star, right? Why not? Yeah. And I can see Zowe files Zowe files list winchj dot star, which is effectively what I was listing here. And then let's do another quick one. That's a data set, winchj.jcl, bob123. So I can actually happen to know Zowe files. What else have we got? We've got view, haven't we? Down here, there's somewhere view. Zowe files view ds, winchj.jcl. What was it? Bob123. Here we are. And it retrieves it. So what's quite nice about this is that without me having to effectively log into the mainframe environment, I can run commands from my laptop. And that's super duper powerful, because what lots of customers do is they string those commands together into a script to do something interesting, to do some automation. It could be something very simple, just like running a task, submitting a job, checking whether it's finished or not, and then perhaps maybe pinging another server or sending an email or something like that. And because you're doing that all within your MacBook and not doing it on the mainframe, you can operate with all of the other software that you've got on your MacBook, whatever that could be. That could be like a Jenkins pipeline, or it could be sort of, it could be a sort of Slack client, or it could be sort of a plugin to Microsoft Excel. There's really no limit as to how far you can do that. So what you've got is people who are used to programming software on their laptop or on a Linux or Windows or MacBook environment being able to do mainframe skills. Now I'm just going to quickly do Zowe -HW. Whenever you're stuck for whatever the syntax of the Zowe commands are, you can always do -HW, and I'll just make that a little bit bigger, help web, and you can start searching. So I'm going to type the word submit in here, and it'll tell me everything about how to submit a data set. And there's a lot, and I'm just going to go all the way to the bottom of this. And all of the Zowe commands in the help have, once they get to the bottom with the example syntax, there's a little copy button there, which is kind of cute. So I'm going to hit copy. I'm going to go back to my terminal. And I had a data set called winchj.jcl copy job. I'm fairly sure I did. I'm just going to check Zowe files list ds winchj.jcl. Yeah, I've got winch.jcl. Let me go look at the members, Zowe files, list, AM. I happen to know all members is JCL. Okay, that's kind of cool. Interestingly enough, if I want to look at the one called copy job, I can do Zowe files view ds winch.jcl copy job. And I'm just going to submit it. I could edit this. Earlier on, I was editing it in Visual Studio Code. One thing that I could actually try and do, let's see if I can do this. This is going to get a bit weird, right? But I can actually edit this directly within my terminal. I could actually do Zowe files edit ds. I haven't actually done this, so I'm not quite sure what's going to happen. But I was on a Scrum call recently. Keep and continue editing temporary file. Yes. Retrieves it. View difference. No. It's now actually opening it directly in Word, which happens to be the default editor on my MacBook. And I'm going to change that to be called, I'm looking at my desk right now and I can see a nice cup of coffee. I have no idea if this is going to work. What's it gone and done? What's it gone and done? Override remote with local edits. So let's go and have a look at, I mean, I really did literally do something that I probably should not have done in the middle of a demo. Basically, what I went and did was I basically did an edit. It went to my MacBook that edited it in Word. Word didn't kind of understand what was going on with the, there are probably some strange characters in that. But basically what I managed to do, if I execute that job, it should submit, it should run that and copy the contents of the data set called from to the data set called copy. Now remember, the way you do copy, when we're back here, I did the Zowe help web. We do Zowe job submit. Let's do that one here. So, and I'm sorry if I'm going a bit too quick, but I tend to get carried away when I demo. winch.jcl copy job. So what that should be doing is that should be, and let me just close all of these down. So let me go back. There's the job. Why? Interestingly enough, before somebody notices what I just noticed, it looked like it had some stale data there. So let me quickly. Yeah, because it should have the word coffee in it. Anyway, so it should submit that job. I'm going to try and submit that job. Now, what I'm trying to do here is if I do Zowe job submit data set and I enter the name of the job, and if I haven't messed up the syntax, whenever a job gets submitted, it goes straight to a input state. It gets put on the Jez queue. And it in fact came back so quickly that the job hadn't even executed. It hadn't even started to execute. Now, one of the things that's unfamiliar to non-mainframers is why the jobs run asynchronously. There is a very good reason for that. Like the job could take forever to run. And there was a reason why you need to run asynchronous jobs, because you put them on a Jez queue and then Jez runs it for you. But it's more easier when you're scripting for things to be synchronous. So if I go and look at the help for that, all of the Zowe commands, I've been quite simple with my commands so far. They have lots and lots of different options. So one of them is I'm going to say wait for output. And if I go back to my terminal and I recall it and I do -- wait for that, what you'll see is it will say submitting job, waiting, and it's now come back in the output state. And often the next thing you want to do is you want to see, I want to see what happened. I want to download it. So now you do VASC. And what's happening now is I'm trying to show, that's just because I minimized my shell, all of those things were coming back. What you can see now is within one command, you're basically saying, do a post request, spin, wait for the status to change, because there's no notification coming back that the job is actually finished on the REST API, and then download all the spool content, code page convert it. And what's cute about that is that I can now do grep if I want to, and then time. So when you're scripting, and again, that's just literally all of those weird stuff is happening just because of the way my terminal is set. I might, just to prove it, I might just minimize it a little bit. So what you've got there is you've got the ability when you're writing scripts for the command to actually do lots of heavy lifting for you and go back and forth. I've got another question. Thanks, Mark. Can we issue system commands or anything that's interesting from a particular helper? Good question. So I'll try and answer it, and hit me up if I get it wrong. One of the things you can do, I'll maximize this a little bit more, and I'll just do it. So I can do Zowe TSO. So I'm going to do the most simple command is like LU, right? I can think of. Well, actually, not the most simple. The most simple probably would have been time or something like that. So that's just a command. And if you have a look at that command there, by the way, because I issued a TSO command, it created a TSO session, and I've got all of the GORP at the front. I can actually do SSM for suppress startup messages. So that's actually really interesting because sometimes, like if we don't have a particular command, so for example, there isn't a REST API to manipulate, key rings and certificates and things, but you can do them through, rack dsert, gensert commands and things like that, assuming that your user ID's got the right permission. So what I know some customers do is they just issue a lot of TSO commands. Whenever you issue a TSO command, it will create a TSO address space for you and tear it down, but you can do Zowe TSO start. Then you get the ID of that address space back, and you're basically having a conversation. Then you can issue TSO commands to do things like allocates and stuff, and prepare that, which is better from a client server point of view. And it also means you've got a stateful session, or you can just run a bunch of recs as well, because you can do a lot within recs. You can the JCL, the C lists, you can do things. The other thing is Zowe console issue command, and I think the one that all of the kids use is IPL info. So Zowe console issue command. So you can issue console commands as well. And that's just the IPL info that you've got. So you can. Now, the other one is, can you issue commands targeting system symbols? Oh, good question. So the answer is yes. And I'm going to show that. So if you look at this piece of JCL here, I copied this member called from to a member called coffee. What I'm going to do is I'm going to change that to be called ampersand to and ampersand from. Okay. Actually, let me put ampersand FO instead of ampersand from, just to demonstrate what I'm trying to do. So what we've got now is we've got the JCL is parameterized. The JCL is not hard coded. So if I go back here and if I try and submit that JCL, which was, what was it? Let me, somewhere here it was, winchday.jcl.copybob. It's going to die, right? It's just going to go. It's a JCL error, okay? Quite clearly a JCL error, and a JCL error is because it doesn't know what on earth to do with those. So what we do is we basically submit the data set, winchday.copyjob, and you do -- JCL symbols. And again, if you lose a track of all of this, you'll see that we've got the option for JCL symbols here. So I go back to JCL symbols, and I think the syntax is, what did I do? I had an FO and a TO. So I think the symbol is FO equals, and unfortunately for JCL, I now have to go into uppercase. So I want to copy the member that's got from. Let's go back into here. So I'm going to say, what am I going to say? Great question mark, and save it just to from, and then I'm going to do 2 equals, and I have to enter the name, a valid one, and I'm going to enter Joe, whatever, Joe Love. I'm tired. I can't think of anything better. And let's do that one. And when that submits, my mistake, but let's have a look and see if it actually worked. Well, it did work. Anyway, so, I mean, it could have gone 10, but you can see what happens there. And that's quite common. I get quite a lot of customers where what they do is they create JCL that's parameterized. They have one group within their IT shop that creates very parameterized JCL. It's a bit like an API. And then somebody else in the non-mainframe team says, oh, I can call this and I can pass in LPAR names and things. Next question is, where's Zowe secured from RACF? Great question. So the way that Zowe is secured is that, yes, the answer is yes for RACF. It's a little bit more involved, and I'll see if how am I doing for time? I've got like 5 minutes left. So I'll go and show you within, so my user ID and password is held on my laptop securely within a secure credential store. So I'm just going to delete that. So if I go and have a look So within my MacBook, I have something called a keychain, and it's where all of my certificates and VPN and stuff like that is secured. And I'm just going to delete this quickly. And I'm going to say delete. So it's gone. So it's now forgotten. I have no secure information held. Now, if I go Zowe, I don't know, jobs, list jobs, because it doesn't know who I am, but it does know information about the system because that's defined in a team configuration file that I've shared. It asks me, and I'm just going to enter it. And I made a mistake. So I literally, because I'm just fat fingered, I made a mistake. So I'm going to delete it again. My bad. So if you have a look, I've got nothing there. Okay, 443, by the way, is I think 401 is invalid. So 443 is actually a firewall error. So I'm just going to make sure that I haven't actually just got booted off my firewall. I just got booted off my firewall. Okay, sorry about that. I have to log into a firewall to get access to the system that I'm using because it's in Toronto. Okay, so now I am. So here we are. So now I do Zowe jobs, list jobs. Now, boom. And I got my jobs back. And if you saw that little thingamajig appeared there. So all of the properties are secured for my user ID and password. So it's all secured. By the way, it doesn't have to be RACF. RACF is IBM's ESM. Broadcom has one called Top Secret and ACF2 as well. And Zowe works perfectly with all of those. So yeah, you only have permission to do what is your user ID lets you do. And your user ID, if you're using user ID and password, are squirreled away in a very safe way that can't be snuffed by anybody else. It's the same way that you authenticate to your VPN at work. There are other ways to do it as well with client-side certificates, a little bit more fiddly to set up. You can use single sign-on, multi-factor authentication, and actually, depending on how much software you want to install, Zowe has something called an API mediation layer, and you can actually authenticate outside of Zowe using an OIDC, I think it's called, using OAuth or other sort of Okta-based SSO providers. So you can already be authenticated to the rest of your organization, and then when you come down through Zowe, Zowe is able to associate that with the TSO privileges that you have within the mainframe, and that's something that a lot of customers are asking for. One more question: can the console command target individual LPARs in the Plex hosting ZOSMF? System symbols are referring to in those in IEA sim. It's a great question, and I don't want to bluff the answer on that. So I'll probably have to say I don't know. I know a little bit about the topic, but not enough to answer it in 1 minute. But thanks very much for that question. And Chris, we started at 4:30, didn't we?
Yes.
Which means I have all of 1 minute left, right?
What's the time now? Yeah, we've got a minute, but I mean, if you're a little bit over, I'm sure it's fine.
Oh, okay. Are you sure?
Yeah, I mean, I'm all right as long as everybody else is.
I don't know. I didn't want to sit here. Anything else that literally, it's a great question, Mark, and I'm going to write that question down and make a note from it. I'm pretty sure in the ZOSMF's REST API that you can target within the put command. There is a parameter available that lets you do that. I don't know whether that's surfaced in the Zowe command line interface or not. And I think that's what you're referring to, the system symbols. I don't know what IEA sim is. I have to admit, you've stumped the jump on that one.
It's a palm lib member where you define all your system symbols in there.
Okay.
The palm lib. So I think that's what he's talking about, that palm member where you define all your symbols.
I am going to learn everything I can about that. And in medium.com.zoe, in less than a few weeks' time, you're going to see a blog about that. Because I need to, one of the things I love about the mainframe community is I don't know what it's like for the rest of you, but I'm always learning every day when I get up. Every day is a school day for me, which basically keeps me fresh, keeps me dumb, but it keeps me smart at the same time. So, Another thing I wanted to very quickly see, I've got a little cute diagram here, and this might be interesting about connectivity, is so we can talk to Zowe SMF. What I was doing there was I was connecting directly to port 443. Once you get lots of extensions for Zowe, and the command line interface has 22 extensions from everything from DB2 to MQ to Endeavor to JCL Expert, workload automation, Phoenix, EJAZ software, you end up with a very messy client-server topology where you have to know what all of these ports are. So Zowe has something in the middle that's really, really cool called the API mediation layer. And what happens is you install that on ZOS, and that's a bit like a DNS server because you just connect to that, and that handles all of your connections for you. And these can be appear or reappear or disappear. And a system programmer can define all of the southbound, I've got it the wrong way around, that's more of like a eastbound, but the southbound connections in the client-server topology, define them all, and then all of your clients just connect to the mediation layer, and they always get the most fresh and current information about the topology of all of the running systems. So you don't have that kind of client-server nightmare managing connections. The other really cute thing that the API mediation layer from Zowe does, when you run it alongside the CLI and the Visual Studio Code, Zowe Explorer. By the way, there's also a plugin for IntelliJ as well. I didn't have time to demonstrate it, but it's really, really powerful. And if you like IntelliJ, you've got pretty much the same level of functionality that I just demonstrated to you. And in some ways, a little bit more, actually. So what the API mediation layer can do, if you want high availability, so you want to have multiple instances, so perhaps one of them you can take down, or you've got resiliency and you've got greater throughput, it's basically able to effectively have a multiple server that's able to dispatch to the most relevant API endpoint. And that also works across a sysplex, which is pretty cute as well. That's about it. I think I'm going to wrap up there, Chris, if that's all right. I just want to be respectful of people's time, but I'll stay until the last question, until the last person leaves and the last question comes.
Yeah, so thanks, Joe. What a great session. And we'll give it a moment just for any questions to come in quickly. But yeah, conscious of other people's time, we'll just give it maybe a couple of 30 seconds, maybe.
Often I get asked questions from DB2 people. I suppose that maybe the DB2 people are all somewhere else today. Or
Obviously, like you
maybe
said earlier, people can reach out to you on LinkedIn and stuff, can't they?
yeah, please do. Yeah, please do. Yeah, please don't be shy. I didn't show the Zowe desktop, which is a pretty cool. I don't have time to show it, but I'm just going to quickly whiz back into there. A slide that I had. The Zowe desktop, when you install Zowe's ZOS server component as well, which does all of the really cool, reverse proxying, high availability of services. It's also required for things like the advanced authentication scenarios about client-side certificates or OAuth protocols or multi-factor authentication. It also has a desktop built in. And within the desktop, you just literally log into it, user ID and password in the desktop. It does what it says in the tin. So just through a browser, you have the ability to have a rich client exploring data sets and Unix system services. It also has a 3270 emulator, which is surprisingly popular because there's nothing wrong with the 3270 emulator. There's still a lot of applications that work very, very well in this form factor. So it has one of those in a browser, which is actually quite cute because you can just share that. And there might be some, if you've got some very old vendor software that they're gouging you for, was perhaps a bit long in the tooth, this is pretty fresh and does a lot for you. And it just runs in a browser. And the reason I asked about the DB2 people is that the Zowe desktop is the kind of backbone behind all of DB2's kind of modernization tooling. And I'll just click through this. So for DB2 system programmers who are used to using DSM or DB2 Data Studio, which ran within the Eclipse platform, this is their kind of sort of modern, and this is a demo given by a colleague of mine called Summer Karasaram. The slides will be available, and I think this still fits inside the slide. So if you want to, you can get the video, and I've got a few more links. But that DB2, so there's a lot of interest in Zowe at the moment because a lot of DB2 shops are trying to install it and configure it because they're moving towards DB2 version 13. So we're seeing quite a lot of activity there. But if anybody has any issues to do with that, just reach out or go to the Zowe Slack channel. Am I still sharing my screen? So within Slack, let me see. So within Slack, so we use Slack quite a lot at IBM, but within Slack as well, you can go to Zowe APML. There's a lot of Slack channels available. They're doing their PI planning at the moment for so you can get a Zowe CLI and you can just ask questions, and people are asking great questions. That's Gene Johnson. So if you want to engage with the community, go to Slack. Everybody is out there in Slack, and also within Discord as well. One of the things that literally just got created, I think like maybe even last week, there's something called System Z Enthusiasts, and a lot of cool stuff going on within there. And there's Zowe, you can ask Zowe questions. And what's neat about that is often these are being, I mean, Lionel is author, one of the people who works on CBT tape. He's one of these kind of legends within the ZOS community. A lot of people are very, very active within Slack and Discord community.
Cool. Let's wrap up there then. So yeah, thanks everyone for joining us today, and thanks again, Joe, for telling us a bit more about Zowe. It's fantastic. Please do leave feedback, as it is well appreciated. And thanks all, and be sure to join us for further sessions on the 102 track tomorrow and Thursday.
Yeah, thanks, Crick. It's session 2F as well.
2F,
for,
yes.
For the feedback, yeah. F for fantastic.
I can stick a link in the chat. Brilliant. Well, I'll do
Thanks,
that.
Chris.
Thanks,
Bye,
Joe.
everyone. Cheers. Stay safe.